All right, Snake Blocker here, and I'm here with my good friend and brother, and we're going to have Sifu Kai Lei talk about some of his connections with his integration from doing traditional martial arts and branching off into several different martial arts from there, from the time he was a kid to an adult. But I wanted to focus today's topic more or less on him connecting into the Jeet family, Junfeng Kung Fu, the associations, the different masters that you've had a chance to work and train with as far as the first generation Bruce Lee students. So if you can kind of go into that, that'd be awesome.
Well, on an intrinsic level, on a visceral level, my last name is Lee. So when I was a little boy, my father, who also was a martial artist, and actually his father, and my mother's father, so multi-generational martial artist, my great-grandfather as well, he felt like the martial arts were a good thing for us to do at a very young age, not just for the self-defense aspect, but culturally, from a Hawaiian perspective and from a Chinese perspective. His upbringing said that it was a very important way to really know yourself. And his whole family were all healers. So his father was a physician, his grandfather was a physician as well. And that aspect of medicine, of healing, being also a yin-yang component with the martial arts aspect, that you need to know yourself to either hurt or heal. And when you're a child growing up, especially since we were mixed race, because like Bruce Lee, our family also was multi-ethnic and multicultural. And the term for me, multi-ethnic and multicultural, is what I use, because I actually believe there's only one race, the human race. As Bruce Lee said, under the sky, under the heavens, we are all one family. And that was an important thing, because in my father's generation, that was rare. Outside of Hawaii, there weren't that many mixed ethnicity, mixed cultural families. And so it was a big deal. And to kind of motivate my brother and I, my father put a poster of Bruce Lee up in the room that we shared as small children. And jokingly, but you don't know that when you're 6 or 4 years old, he said, "Oh, train hard like Uncle Bruce." So my brother and I literally thought that Bruce Lee was our uncle. And at that time, there was no Jeet or Junfan Kung Fu classes that I was aware of in Hawaii. At that time, though, we were with my paternal grandfather doing some Kung Fu and learning how to do Chinese lion dancing, traditional Kung Fu type of skills. And then my mother's father was a Judo Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and so we were doing that as well. And formally, the first class I went to was my father's teacher, Uncle David Uhiva, who also came from the Okazaki Jiu-Jitsu line and trained with Chow and Kempo, and was a no-holds-barred fighter that won unbelievable contests back in the 40s and 50s. And that whole atmosphere, to me as a small child, I didn't see a separation. I saw all these different people in the Hawaiian sense as aunties and uncles, as relatives, that were contributing to that warriorship, to that pool of warriorship. But as I got older, I got really into reading. And like Bruce Lee, was a voracious reader. So I remember in 3rd grade, my father and my maternal grandfather, my mom's dad, were watching Dr. No. And in theory, I wasn't supposed to watch that because I was 8. But they were watching that, and in the film, Ursula Andress' character knows something that James Bond doesn't know. And he asks her how she could know that, and he says, "How do you know all of this information?" And she says, "Well, my father's a professor, and he taught me with a set of encyclopedias. I've never been to school. And right now I'm on K or T," something like this. So as a little kid at the time, I said, well, if I read the whole encyclopedia, then can I not have to go to school? And again, my dad wasn't serious like the Bruce Lee uncle thing, but he said, sure. So I thought he was serious. Now, kind of as a joke, my mom's dad, the very next day, bought a whole set of encyclopedias for the family and said, "Oh, here you go, start with A." So then I started doing that, and by 8th grade, I read the whole thing, making me like the most irritating kid in middle school, right? But then because of that...
So you read every one, A through Z?
I did.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And the indexes, too. I really got the bug of the concept that education is something that should be self-motivated. That you then, encyclopedia articles only so long, but it can give you the inspiration to go pursue something else. It's kind of like in Jeet Kune Do in particular, there's an invitation there through Bruce's lifelong study. There's an invitation that says, hey, Snake, here's a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Here's a little bit of Sambo. Here's a little bit of catch wrestling. Oh, striking? Here's a little bit of Savate. Here's a little bit of Muay Thai. Here's a little bit of American kickboxing. Right? But somewhere in there, you might feel a connection viscerally with one of those arts or one of those cultures, and then pursue it more in depth. On the base level, the main thing was to function in those different ranges. And so as long as you can function and flow in and out of range, from weapons range to kickboxing range to clinch grappling range to trapping range to takedown to ground, and vice versa. And of course, in real life, things don't start far and end close, or start close and end far. It could happen anywhere in there, and more than one person, and weapons or no weapons. But somewhere in there, beyond what you need to be functional overall, as what I like to say is being like a human Leatherman or a human Swiss Army knife, in the sense that you're one tool that has many sub-tools. And depending on your growth pattern, you might stay Boy Scout camper knife and be exceptional with 5 tools. Or you might go full-on Swiss champ and have like 38 tools. I mean, depending on how much time and effort you're going to put into it, you can do either one or somewhere in between. But in the beginning, that wasn't available to me. It was only the books. So 3rd grade, with the encyclopedia, also came my starting to read, even though I didn't understand it much, Bruce Lee's Fighting Method, the Uehara books, and Tao of Jeet Kune Do. The irony is what I got from that was drawing the pictures. So as a kid, my mother was an artist, my father was a soldier, and I drew a lot. I like to draw. So then what happened was I started imitating what Bruce Lee was doing, and whatever I was working on training, I draw little pictures and sketches. Now at that time, again, there was no Jeet Kune Do. So as a kid, I was doing the judo and jiu-jitsu like my mother's father did. And then I was doing Kaiju Kempo and Kempo on the alternate days because, compliment to my brother was better than me at baseball and soccer. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do martial arts every day. So fortunately, Hawaii is unique because we have so much Asian culture here from every different facet that somewhere there's another class. And back in the day, to take multiple martial arts was like trying to be born again Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and Buddhist at the same time. But when you're a kid, no one really notices. So I started to do that because I was curious from the encyclopedia articles. I read that, and then I go to the library and look up a book on that particular thing and study that. So then what happened was I was looking at Bruce Lee's ideas, and even though I didn't fully understand them, it led me to ask questions of people that I thought would understand it. So that I would ask my Kaiju Kempo teacher, George Iverson, questions, and I would ask my Judo and Jiu-Jitsu teacher questions. And a lot of times they were honest with me and said, oh, I'm not sure what the answer is to that, but I think it's a good question. And to me, that meant I should keep trying to find the answer. It was like being a martial archaeologist or a martial explorer, if you will, from a childhood mindset. So it was primarily those two things. And then by the time I was in 6th grade, I started to get curious about the backstory of Kaiju Kempo, which is Ka for Karate, Ju for Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, Ken for Kempo, and Bo for boxing, meaning both Western boxing as well as Chinese boxing or Kung Fu. And I asked my teacher about that, and he said, well, he's not sure. And I said, well, I think the only way I'm going to really understand Kaiju Kempo is if I understand all the parts. So I need to take karate, I need to keep training in Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, I need to learn the old Kempo, and I need to box, and I need to learn a form of Kung Fu. And it was my Kaiju Kempo teacher that said, if you're going to do Kung Fu, you should do Wing Chun or Jeet Kune Do because your last name is Lee. Mm-hmm. And so that was a full circle back to childhood. Now at that time, there was no formal Jeet Kune Do class that I was aware of. There was an underground Wing Chun Do class under James DeMille, but I didn't know about it. And the closest thing was Wing Chun. So I went and pursued that. There was a Wing Chun school in Chinatown here in Hawaii. Robert Young, who originally was from Hong Kong, ran it. And he had several mixed race students. His senior student was John DeVirgilio, who was half Chinese, and then James Sweet, who was half Japanese, and Wade Ching, who was half Chinese. So 3 of the top guys in the school were also mixed race, and that was very encouraging to me. And so I actually learned Wing Chun before I learned any formal Jeet Kune Do.
Right.
And then at a tournament, I was at a tournament when my name was said out loud, and Wally J was there. And Wally J, for those of you who might not know, he trained with Bruce Lee, and it's actually because of Wally J's party that Bruce Lee met Ed Parker and got invited to the 1964 Internationals, which really launched his public career. So Wally J recognized my name, and he came up to me and he said, "Do you, by any chance, have a relative that was a doctor with the same name as you in the 1920s?" And I said, "Yes, my great-grandfather was also Kai Lee." And shared with him the story of that family history. And he said, "Well, your great-grandparents were my family's doctors for free when I was a child.
Cool.
Your great-grandparents delivered me into the world as a baby. And every time my family needed a doctor, your family helped us and would only accept mangoes in return." Meaning basically they were helping him for free. And so he said, "If you have any interest in small circle jiu-jitsu," which was his form of his expression of the art, "I have a camp for high school kids, and I want to invite you to be my guest. You can come to my house and go to the camp and see if you might have some fun." So it was a huge opportunity. I said yes. When I went to that camp, I got introduced to Guru Danny DeSanto and James DeMille, also who trained with Bruce Lee.
And not to cut you off, but let's do that as part 1, and we'll have a part 2 coming up next.
All right.